So now we're back from our break. We'll edit this part out, that's okay. So we have our loan in place. We've negotiated our reserves, okay? And trust me, all banks are gonna require reserves. It's my job, part of my job, and the loan broker's job to talk the bank off the ledge to the shortest reserve, the smallest reserve we can. And the reason being, wouldn't you like to have your money in your account to take care of the building or take care of whatever you need to do, right? Go to New York with me in September. So the point is, no, don't, okay? But the point, I'm kidding. The point is that very typically in multifamily, we might see a reserve balance of $250 per unit. Okay, so 100 units, we've got a $25,000 reserve sitting there. They need that. You need that to do work. It's very interesting, people ask me about assumable commercial loans. I haven't seen an assumable commercial loan for a long time, but if they were out there, it's not the assumption of the loan that's hard, it's how you deal with the escrow accounts. That's the hardest part of those deals, because the seller may have X amount of dollars in the escrow account, the bank's not gonna give it up, but where do we get, why should the buyer get the benefit of the seller's reserve accounts? So that's something that can be a little complicated to work through. So, we have the appraisal in. What are we waiting for? Maybe a phase one, okay? A phase one, somebody goes out, looks at the property and says, it's okay. They'll do some historicals on the property and go, this is closed, this is good, because environmental is very important. Phase one isn't your environmental. If the bank or you as the buyer call for a phase two, well, that's another layer, and all of that takes time, okay? And the phase two, maybe they found something. Let's say that you're buying I actually have a client in northern Arizona, and he owns a piece of land next to a Circle K, and the Circle K's underground storage tanks are leaking onto his property. And he called me and he said, Linda, I want you to list this land. And he's a pretty well-known guy, and I said, I'm not comfortable listing that. How am I gonna sell a property that we know is contaminated? I said, the only thing I'm gonna do is pick up the phone to Circle K and sell it to Circle K, right? And I said, why don't you do that yourself? And he did it, But the point is that if you have known environmentals or your phase one inspectors or your engineers see something that needs to be explored farther, then you're going to go to a phase two. A phase two is typically where they drill into the dirt, sometimes through asphalt, right? And they're going to check to see if a storage tank is leaking this far. Okay? Farmland. A lot of storage tanks on farmland that you don't know about. Okay? They store diesel, they fertilizer, things like that in underground storage tanks. And it's okay to buy something with underground storage tanks as long as it's been handled correctly. So let's suppose that we get through phase two, and the engineers say, well, what about this? Okay. You may go to a phase three, even a phase four. Typically on a phase two, they've got these issues, so you're going to clear up those issues. However you're going to clear them up, and there's thousands of ways. But you get that cleared up, well, then you got to get a phase three out there to look it over and make sure it was done right. Okay? And maybe it wasn't, and then you go to a phase four, and you could keep going phases, and it could be very expensive. However, let me assure you, if you do not know what your environmental risk is, the EPA, and we actually took a class on this recently, but the EPA will actually come in and they basically tag the guy with the most money. Okay? That may not be fair, but that's what they do. So let's say that you're pretty cash liquid and you own the property, but you don't have a lot of money, but you were on the chain of title, they're going to go after you because you're the one that they can get money from, right? That's the EPA. But they can tag somebody along the way to do the cleanup. $250,000 is not unusual. I have a client that spent $450,000 to clean up a $360,000 property. Okay. I have another client, we were selling a cold storage food warehouse on the west side. And we got into contract, we get in there, and in the back of the building were these 55-gallon drums. You think that scared me when I looked at it? I thought, oh, crud, what are we gonna have here? So there are companies that will come out, they will remediate them, they will actually test them to see what they were. These were chicken fat, so we were okay, but we didn't know that. And I'm glad I didn't open it because, oh God, I could imagine that. But those are the kinds of things that you do. My client that spent $450,000 on a property, we believe it was possibly a homeless person, opened the transformers and the TCPs went into the ground, which is probably one of the worst environmental things that you can deal with. Okay? So there's those. Now, we don't usually do them on apartments, but you can and probably should. The times that I have seen my clients request phase ones for their own peace of mind, some of these apartment buildings, you know, the asphalt's not been redone for a while, or it's not been cared for properly, and people park there with cars that leak oil, right? And you'll see on the asphalt, you know, the big rings of oil, and it's sunken in and it's pretty dirty, right? So we did a phase one because we wanted to make sure that that oil did not go all the way into the ground, okay? So, as the agent, I was the buyer's agent in this particular case, we did the phase one, and it came back questionable on the oil spots. We knew it would, right? So the second phase, we went out, they actually drilled through the asphalt. It was clean. There was not oil through the asphalt yet, okay? So that was okay, but I had to go back as the buyer's agent and convince the seller and the seller's agent that it was okay for us to drill through the asphalt. I had to get their permission. In that case, we had to do insurance, we had to insure, we actually put more money into escrow, made it non-refundable, only based on that if they damaged and did not repair the asphalt back to where it should be. So be prepared of that. Your bank's gonna require a termite inspection. Well, that's pretty normal, okay? So that's not a big thing to worry about. So that's your third parties, basically, and they may call for something else. As you go through that process, you're going to know what you need, but don't do it just for the bank. Do it for yourself too. And you and I are going to have a discussion of what you feel you want on the property. I may give some recommendations, but ultimately you guys are the ones that are going to write the checks. So I want to make sure that you get everything that you need and everything that you want, but you need to understand what you're getting into before we start signing contracts, or you start signing contracts for your third parties. Okay? Now, one of the things that we do is that we can send it out for bid. And we'll talk about environmentals, so maybe we send it to 4 companies. But we have to be very clear on how you want that bid created. What do you want with that bid? Okay? Here's what happens. The seller has a phase one, and the phase one's 5 years old. It's invalid. We want it if we can get it. All information is good, but it's invalid, right? So we want a new one. Okay? The bank's going to require a new one. Surveys are the only thing where if we get an ALTA survey, if the seller has an ALTA survey and we can get a hold of it, and an ALTA survey kind of looks like a stack of blueprints, even though it's not blueprints. But it's that big and a bunch of pieces of paper and stuff, and when you spread it out, it kind of does look like blueprints. But if we can get that, and if the engineer or the surveyor that did that report is still in business, we can save a lot of time and a lot of money by having them update the report. And you're going, well, what are you talking about? Okay, so we're going to talk about that ALTAs just for a little bit, okay? Because you need to understand the difference between a survey and an ALTA survey. So I'm erasing because that's what I do. Okay. So here's your property, and I'm not the best artist. Okay? And you just want a regular survey. So remember we talked about the pen survey. So they're going to go out and actually put these little metal things, maybe you've seen them on properties. Here, here. If the property comes in here, they'll put one here. Wherever your corner points are, they're going to put the pins. Okay? Now you know then that you own right to there when you close. Okay? That's all you're going to find out. However, what if, here's a what if, your bank, by the way, and your title company will actually drive the property during escrow. You'll see a title fee, maybe $75 or $100, because especially in the land of fraud, people were financing property that didn't have buildings on it. Okay? And title was insuring, title insurance So yeah, they will have an inspection fee on your commercial loan too, or on your settlement statement. So, but what happens, you think you're buying this, right? Your marketing pack, maybe you're a foreign investor, you're not even gonna see the property. And I do represent investors that never see their properties. So they think they're buying this when maybe this has been torn down to make a carport or something, right? So they're not getting this building. An Alta survey takes your legal description from title, and when you open escrow, your title company needs to know if you're going to do an Alta, because they start immediately interfacing with whoever's going to do the Alta. They're going to check out easements. They're going to make sure the building's what the legal says, what we have. They're going to make sure utility easements, any kind of assessments on the property, anything that's on this property. And so when you get the Alta survey back, it's going to have lines here and lines here and lines here all over the place. Well, if we can get a hold of an older Alta, and that person is still in business, not retired, not out of business, and we get them to update it, they take this, they go back out and look at it again. Because what if we have this building, but since the last one was done, the last Alta, you gave an easement to Bookmans, okay? Barnes & Noble. I say Bookmans, I meant Barnes & Nobles. So now that recorded easement's going to show there. Okay? That's okay. You just want to know what you're getting. The bank wants to know what you're going to get too. Okay? Now, there's a very famous case, and maybe some of you have heard this, in Phoenix. There's a grocery store named Fry's. It used to be Smitty's, for those of you that, and they bought a piece of property on the west side, and it was their #1 store for many years here in Phoenix. So it was Smitty's at the time. So Smitty's buy this property, and it was a piece of dirt. And so they go in and they build a grocery store, right? That's what they do. In the back of grocery stores, if you've ever seen them, they have like a piece out here usually, and that piece is like where they store the groceries before they put them in. You know, it might be cold storage or not. And this one had one on each side, okay? And it's operating. Well, somebody didn't do either an Alta or didn't do a correct one. Now, I wasn't involved, thank God, okay? So we had some easements. Now we had an easement that went here. It's a pretty famous case here in Arizona. An easement that went here, an easement that went here, and an easement that kind of went this way. Okay? Now, the easement that went here was owned by a utility company called Southwest Gas. So Southwest Gas owned the easement. They had the ability to go in at any time and start jackhammering right through here and put a gas line in. Well, when Fry's figured this out, or Smitty's, they didn't like that, would you agree? Here's what you do with Southwest Gas. If they're not going to use that easement, they will sell you the easement. Southwest Gas sells them for $2,500. Don't try to negotiate it, because they don't do it. They have to sign one little piece of paper to release this easement. And it's $2,500. It's not $2,000, it's not $3,000, it's $2,500. Okay? So they got this one released. Okay? This easement was, I think this was APS, okay? Utility company. The utility company said, we're not releasing it. And, Mr. Smitty, you've got to go in and tear this down and move it, because we want it free and clear. And they had to. Do you think somebody may have lost their job over that? I probably would have fired somebody for that. Somebody didn't do their homework here. Somebody. This one, I didn't mention this was the canal up here, the CAP. This was an easement from the CAP. They did get that one released. But remember I said there's one right here? Okay. There's a little guy. We have what we call orphan tax parcels. They're really not anything. They're just little pieces of stuff that didn't fit in the maps, and they're all over town. They're all over everywhere. It's called orphan parcels. They may not even be assessed at the county for taxes. They're just little orphan parcels everywhere. Well, there was a parcel here that was about 1 foot wide and 30 feet long in the middle of the parking lot. And the little old man that owned it went to Smitty's, and here's what he said. Pay me $30,000. And Smitty said, go away. And he went away. The next day he came out, and he started putting a wall up here. That's his right? It's his land. He got the $30,000. And probably somebody at corporate was pretty upset.
Who was representing Smitty's at the time?
I have no idea.
Good.
So here's the point of having a good ALTA done, okay? Those are the things that your bank wants to make sure is not there. But you as a buyer want to make sure of that too. Because as a buyer, you may someday be a seller. How would you like to sell this to Smitty's? And also your deal falls apart because you didn't go get this released, or you didn't take care of this, or whatever, right? Forget about the part that they had to move up here, you know, and they truly had to tear it down and rebuild it. I think they built it kind of over here somewhere, if I remember right. Very famous ALTA case here in Arizona. So that's important, and that's the reasons why you get an ALTA survey. And it takes about 3 weeks, depending on what the size of the deal that you're doing. But it's very important because when we write the contract, we say, if the seller has a survey, whether it be an ALTA or a regular survey, they have to release it to us. Now, let's suppose that you're in escrow, and you decide this is not the escrow for you, and you cancel. You are under contract to return to the seller those documents. They are not on a desk, guys. They're not on a stick. Those kind of things, they're big pieces of paper, and you know, I've FedExed many of them back and forth. Okay? So, that's an ALTA. Any questions on ALTA and what? And they interact with title all the way through it to make sure the legal description fits the property. It is the best way to make sure that you know, from easements and building size and everything, what you own. Okay? So, that's an ALTA.
Oh, is an ALTA public knowledge anyplace?
No. No, here's the other thing. When you sign with these engineers to do it, okay, that report is only your property. Okay? Now, and that's why sometimes we can't get an ALTA, because the contract with the seller says that they can't release it to anyone else. I think it's a way for them to make money, but that's what they do. So, the only reports that we can get from the seller are the ones that they are not bound in contract to whoever did these reports, that they can release them. They may not be able to release them. Okay? Pretty much everybody, this is pretty standard. Okay? So, but even if we're not going to use their phase 1 or phase 2 or whatever, if they have them, again, it's information, it's not legal information, but if they have them and we can get a copy of them, can we open that door now? There's stuff in here. We do try to get them. Okay? All we can do is ask. When I send my list of due diligence over on a contract, it's a laundry list. And I have agents that look at my contracts and they go, are you kidding me, Linda? I don't care. Just have the seller sign something that, you know, we don't have lines A, B, and C. That's okay. Because you know what? Then we know what we don't know and we know what we need, right? Okay? So, the other thing that I see some agents do that are probably not as experienced, they ask for 2 years of books and records. Okay? What if the person has only owned it for 1 year? Any seller in their right mind will not release somebody else's books and records because they're responsible for them. I like Mike a lot, but if he gives me books and records, I'm not giving it to anybody else, because if I do, I'm guaranteeing that they're not falsified, that they're accurate and everything. You don't get them from me. Okay? So when I write my contract, I say, owner to provide books and records for the length of the time that they have owned the property. That might be 10 years. That's great. But it doesn't usually happen that way. It's usually somewhere under 5 years that you get. Okay? I have investors that ask for the seller's Schedule E's. Anybody know what Schedule E's are? If you own a property personally, or your entity flows up to you personally, your CPA will create what they call a Schedule E. And that shows the income and expenses and everything that you have on the property. You know what? I don't know about you, but you're not getting my Schedule E's on my properties because it's none of your business. When I report to the IRS, we would hope that it's accurate, truthful, but it may not be the actual numbers on the property. Okay? And the point is, I won't release my own if you ask for them. And the Schedule E form, by the way, is a three-part, you put property A, B, and C, and then you go, more pages on it if you have more properties. And if you ask for a Schedule A, you're actually just showing that you don't know what you're talking about. Because investors, good investors, go in the books and records, the appraisals, the reports, but the Schedule E's are pretty worthless, okay? So, you know what? Ask for what you can get, instead of asking for stuff that they're gonna look at you and go, are you kidding me? You're not getting that, okay? So, now we have the letter of commitment. We're gonna go back to letter of commitment. And we've already gone through, and we've done the appraisal, and we've done the phase one, and we've done the ALTA, we've done everything that we need to do, right? So all of those reports go to the bank. Now it goes to loan committee. Remember when we started, we wanted to make sure that when the loan committee met, that it meets our timeline of whatever we're trying to accomplish, right? So it goes to loan committee. And a loan committee at a bank can be one person, it could be 30 people. And they sit in a room much like this, and they look at the package and they go, yes, no, okay? Now, if you have a letter of commitment that's tight, and that's why you need your attorney to look at those letters of commitment, so they don't have wiggle room. When we get down to it, the wiggle room that they have is the appraisal, and they really don't have that. It's just if the appraisal comes in light, they're not going to do the loan to value, which we learned from our paperwork in the beginning, right? So, if I have, I'm in loan committee, how long does it take to come out of loan committee? Well, it's a famous real estate thing again, it depends. I've seen them come out in a couple of days, and I've seen them come out in 10 or 12 days, it just depends. Okay. But once they come out of loan committee, everybody takes a deep breath, we're going to close, okay? So what they do there is that they're ready to dock it, okay? But they're going to send you the final kind of sheet. Here's the final thing, and loan terms, and here's with the appraisal matched in and stuff, and then you sign off on that, and then they draw their docs. Now, as I said, their docs can be 40 pages long, they can be this thick, they can be whatever. Again, I recommend highly you hire an attorney to take your what? LOC, letter of commitment, and your loan docs and compare the two. And they'll also not only just compare the two, you want to make sure that they're state compliant, you want to make sure that the bank, you know what we haven't talked about is prepayment penalties, okay? I don't know many commercial loans that are reasonable loans that do not have prepayment penalties. Here's what you're going to hear. You're going to hear a 54321, okay? Here's what that is. It's a 5-year loan. In the first year, if you sell that property or you want to pay off the loan, your prepayment's probably going to be pretty high because the bank has put that money out. They don't want it back because they've promised their investors X amount of return. If they get that money back right away, it's called a return on investment. They're not going to get the return on investment that they promised their investors. But if they do, they're going to have a large prepayment penalty here that'll offset that. The next year, year 2, it's probably going to be 80% of whatever this figure is, and it goes on a sliding scale down to the 5-year. So when I go after a property, and one of my first things is the note assumable? The answer in today's world is no, but what's the lockout or the prepayment? So you're going to hear lockout, okay? The lockout is how long is that loan locked? Now, it may not be a 54321. This is probably the best one that you want, okay? Because, maybe year 3 you want to sell the property. Well, let's say it's a fairly large property, and at year 3, your prepayment is $50K, and that's not unusual on a larger property, right? So here's what you do as the seller, right? You need to factor that in, that somebody's going to have to pay this, and it's probably going to be you, that prepayment penalty when you price the property. Can you overprice it by that? Depends. There's a building down on 16th Street that I've been after for 3 years. They did a hard lockout, okay? So, and my client, it's so funny because my client was a fund out of New York. About 3 months after he did not purchase the property when it was attainable, the seller went in and refinanced the property, so that's where he got his hard lockout. So this guy calls me on a Sunday night. He says, Linda, and yeah, because I'm really mad at you. I go, okay, all right. He goes, you didn't make me buy that building. I go, well, I tried. I can't break your arm, okay? So the point is that now that building's unattainable because that lockout on that building, it's about a $4 million building, that lockout is $250,000, and it's gonna sit there for 5 years. Now, I drove by it the other day. They're actually redoing it the exact way I told my potential buyer to redo it, and they're gonna make a fortune. That building is gonna be about a $7 million building when they're done, okay? My buyer could have had that, didn't want to do it, okay? So that's a lockout or a prepayment penalty, if we can understand that, okay? But it's important that your lockout or your prepayment matches your LOC, okay? Because what if you sign that and you had that hard lockout when you thought you had the 54321, okay? Now, there is a term called a soft prepay. And a soft prepay is really hard to get, and it's probably going to cost you about 0.5 point in interest. And what the soft prepay is that lockout is there for the length of the loan. However, if you sell the property to a non-related entity, okay, you can't sell it to your brother, but to a non-related, they'll forgive the prepayment penalty. Here's another way to work around prepayment penalties. We're after a building and it's got a good prepayment penalty. Go to the bank that is doing the financing, because then they don't lose the loan. So if you choose that bank, and if they will, under the perfect world, and they use, and you put the loan right back with them, sometimes they'll forego that. My client that just closed on the one property where he put 50% down, he had a prepayment penalty, but he wanted to sell one of the properties, and we just closed on it 2 weeks ago. So the point is of that, I called the bank, because I wanted to verify what his prepayment penalty was before we even got serious about it, right? And here's what the first thing the bank asked me, is he going to buy another property? I said, well, I don't know yet, maybe. If he takes the loan with us, we'll forego the prepayment. Well, he didn't. His prepayment was $250. It was not a big prepayment penalty, but we verified and we knew what we were dealing with. All of those numbers came into factor when we're negotiating, okay? So that's your prepayment penalty. So now you get your loan documents. If you're married, I guarantee that your spouse is going to have to sign as well, okay? In residential, we can do an indemnification to the title company. Maybe your wife's in Europe for 6 months, and you buy a fourplex, and the title company says, well, we need you to sign, your wife needs to sign this. Maybe your lender's okay with her not signing documents or he not signing documents. I don't want to be sexist. But the point is, the title company has to ensure that. So they do one of two things. You get a disclaimer deed signed by the other spouse, right, that disclaims their interest in the property. But maybe they're, I've had them where my wife doesn't do that. So what we do then is that the other spouse, the one that's signing the documents, signs an indemnification for the title company. And what this does is that this spouse says, if my wife ever comes back, or my spouse, I'm sorry, comes back after this property under community property law, I will not hold the title company responsible for that. Okay? Done. So that's a way that we don't have to chase down somebody who's traveling all over, or maybe not there, and to sign and notarize the disclaimer deed. Otherwise, they have to notarize and send one back. That brings up another thing, quitclaim deeds. Anybody heard of quitclaim deeds? It's not quit, it's quit. Okay? So what happens with that, you break the title insurance chain of title, and that's a really bad thing. I'll give you a little story on that. We were buying a lot of distressed condos in one complex. We were trying to assemble the whole complex. So a few years ago, they'd go to short sale, they'd go to foreclosure, and we'd go pick them up for, $30,000 a piece. But we got in contract on it, and by the way, this is a very nice complex that we worked on. But we got into escrow on one for $60,000, and it was in foreclosure, going to foreclosure. And the seller thought, some lady, thought, I'm going to sign it over to my friend here. so that I can get out of paying the mortgage, which doesn't work because the mortgage is attached to the property, right? So she signed it over to the friend, and we're in escrow for $60,000. We're preparing to close. So title comes back, and then she signs it back, okay? Because title said, no, you gotta be on the deed. While it was over here in the other guy's name, he had $160,000 of judgments against him. What do you think attached to the property? $160,000. Now, my buyer, again, it's not my decision, I called him and I said, hey,